Solasta just released their first big update to the game, which adds the Sorceress class, and thanks to Tactical Adventures, I got to play the Sorceress class early. This is my starter Draconic Fire Sorcerer build to get you guys going in playing this new class. Let's go. This video is sponsored by the developers of Solasta Crown of the Magister Tactical Adventures. Solasta is a turn-based tactical RPG based in the Dungeons & Dragons 5.1 rule set. It has a very well-implemented combat system, so props to Tactical Adventures for that. It features 6 classes, now 7 with the introduction of the Sorceress class with this most recent update. A standard full-length campaign that'll last about 30 hours, plus Steam Workshop support where players are making their own campaigns that you can download and play for yourself. If you'd like to learn more about this game, check out the links in the description down below. Thanks to Tactical Adventures, I'm also giving away 2 copies of this game. If you would like to win one of those copies, please like this video and leave a comment down below with your favorite Dungeons & Dragons class and the reason why. I'll be choosing a winner exactly a week after this video goes live, so be sure to come back to the comments a week after to check if you have won. And last of all, thank you Tactical Adventures for sponsoring this video. Now, let's move on. The Sorcerer is primarily a spell classing class, similar to the Wizard, for example, or some of the other spell casting classes, that's a tongue twister in itself, with some noticeable differences here. For one, you can't prepare different spells when you are long resting. The trade-off, however, is that you can add various meta magic modifiers to your spells using your Sorceress points. These things can add like extra projectiles, do other effects, or even allow you to cast 2 spells in the one turn. A Sorcerer also has the benefit from having an exotic bloodline or other influences, whatever you want to call them, to give them unique class features. For this build, we are solely focusing on the Draconic bloodline and the fire element here, as there is a ton of fire spells available in the game, and with the elemental affinity that you can get at level 6, this adds even more fire damage that you can do, and you can basically just scream Jakaras all over the enemies and you'll do nothing wrong. So let's get into building this character. Now, firstly, we're going to start off with race, and the main thing here is don't use the pre-created Sorcerer. One, it's not a Draconic bloodline anyway. They are not min-maxed either, which I know isn't important for everyone, but it's just worth pointing out. Now for your race, we're going to start off with the half health here because of the +2 to Charisma. Charisma is our spell modifier as a Sorcerer, and is really the only race that you can get that gives you benefits to your Charisma modifier. You can get a +1 with Human, which is the same as the pre-gen one. However, half elf is just the better option here. For your equipment, it's just completely fine how it is. We're not really going to be using much of the equipment anyway, so it's fine to just rock with that. Now, the next major choice you're going to make is your Sorcerer Origin. Now, this is where you pick the Origin, which is your main class feature as the Sorcerer that you're going to play. Solasta has 3 options: the Draconic Bloodline, the Mana Painter, or the Child of the Rift. Each of these options gives you access to some different spells, which you can read on the options, and a primary features and some other features you get as you level up. For the Mana Painter, the Charisma is used as your modifier for all of your saving throws. The Child of the Rift gives you a small chance not to consume a spell slot when you do use one. It is a very small chance. And the Draconic Bloodline, which is our focus here, you can pick a specific damage type to grant affinity for, which we are picking fire. You get various benefits for picking a certain affinity. You can also speak Draconic. You also get an additional hit point per level, and your AC is 13 plus whatever your Dex modifier is, which basically negates the need for Mage Armor, as you can pretty much start out with a AC of 16. You can even get that higher depending on your Dexterity. And the key thing to point out here is that when you level up and hit level 6 and you get the elemental affinity, when you deal spell damage matching your Draconic ancestor, you add your Charisma modifier to the total. And because we're going to have a lot of Charisma, it's just free damage that we are going to be doing. For your background, it's more of a role-playing choice, so I will leave it mostly up to you. However, some good options to look at is the Aristocrat or the Lawkeeper, as they both have proficiencies in Charisma groups like Persuasion and Intimidation. We do have a very high Charisma, so you get the most benefits from having these proficiencies. However, it's a role-playing thing, so it is really up to you. When choosing your attributes, I highly recommend that you keep re-rolling the dice until you get basically a god roll. It's possible to start out the game with a charisma of 20. You can point by, however, you won't be able to get your totals as high as if you're just re-rolling the dice. Your starting attributes will want to look something like this, getting your charisma to about 20, then focus on your dexterity for the armor class benefits as well as your initiative, then your constitution for the HP and constitution saving throws are the key focus here. The constitution constitution is less important because we are going to be playing ranged most of the time. You will avoid a lot of that initial damage, and we aren't going to be casting a whole lot of concentration spells. Something like Hold Person you may use occasionally, however it's not super important to have a high constitution. That's why I feel that it's better to stack dexterity and then go constitution for your second and third stats. Intelligence, wisdom, and strength are all not really important. As long as you aren't going into the negatives here, you should be okay. Getting them to about 10 is just satisfactory to move on from there. For your skills, again, it's role-playing based just like your background. However, I highly suggest stacking in the charisma line or the dexterity line just to give you the most benefits from the modifiers when you are playing the game. Now it's time for the fun part, and that is the spells and the cantrips. Now we'll start with cantrips. Now, the main one you want to pick up here is Firebolt because we are a fire-focused build. This is going to be your main damage dealer in the low levels, as well as you start to level up, you can cast this with some other spells in the same turn. With your sorcery points, you can even make this cast multiple bolts when you do hit level 3 and you do get the meta magic perks, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Firebolt, must have, always pick it up. The other guarantee that you must pick up is something like Dancing Lights or Light, as darkness is a huge crutch in Solasta. Anytime you are dungeon crawling and you are in the dark and you get a disadvantage on your rolls, even for your allies as well, it is a huge negative to have. So as long as you've got something that is casting light and keeping the battlefield nice and lit, it's a good idea to have. Now for your last cantrip slot, I would recommend to pick up something like Ray of Frost, Shadow Dagger, or Acid Splash. It's really up to you what you want to choose here, but it's good to have a cantrip that is a different kind of damage to our primary type of damage that we are doing, being fire. In case you run across enemies that have resistances, it's just a good thing to have so you can avoid some of those resistances if we do come across them, which you will throughout the game. In character creation, you only get to pick up a couple of spells, and the two main ones that I would focus on is Magic Missile, which deals force damage and puts out multiple projectiles that you can target multiple enemies with. This spell doesn't miss. It is great in pretty much every situation, especially when you have disadvantage on enemies and in like a low light situation, like we were talking about, needing to have light. It's a great spell to use just when you need to guarantee hits on enemies. You can even target one enemy with all 3 projectiles. Burning Hands is the next must, as it is a fire spell, and it's also an AoE that deals AoE in a cone in front of you. This you will mostly use if you are in melee range, and I highly recommend to pick this up before something like Thunderwave, as we are focusing on fire damage rather than lightning. You will need to be careful when casting this AoE spell to make sure your allies aren't present in the cone, because you will damage them as well. If you are going to hit them, I mean, just make sure that they can take the hit, really. It doesn't matter too much. They're not going to turn on you, but just be careful. As you level up, you will gain additional spell slots, and you can also forget a spell that you have learned when you are in that level up process. Unlike other classes where you can prepare spells while you are long resting, this is the only way that you can really change the spells that you have as a sorcerer. So it's a good idea to make sure you know exactly what you're going to looking for, as you can't experiment as much as you can with some of the other classes. When you are in that level up process and you're choosing some spells to pick, some options that you should look at, one being Sleep, as you can put enemies in a rather large radius to sleep. This is a valuable spell in a lot of situations, so you can put a large amount of enemies to sleep, so you can focus fire other enemies and then move over to the ones that are asleep and just kind of focus them down individually. Now, as you are leveling up, you will gain these sorcerer's points. You can't really do too much with them until you hit level 3. When you hit level 3, you will be able to choose some meta magic options. The two that I would suggest to pick is Twinned Spell. If the source spell targets one creature only, you can add an additional target. This is how we get our Fireball to hit 2 targets rather than 1. And Quickened Spell. You can cast your main action spell as a bonus action instead, and it allows you to cast another spell, but only a cantrip. So basically what you can do here is cast something like Burning Hands or Firebolt or Scorching Ray as a bonus action, and then as your action, you can cast a cantrip like Firebolt. You can even put Twinned Spell on that as well, so it hits an additional target. So you can get a main spell as a bonus action, a cantrip as an action, and it can hit an extra target as well. There are plenty of ways that you can manipulate the battlefield as a sorceress via these methods. You will also start to gain access to higher level variants of spells and the level 2 and level 3 and above spell lines, but the main ones you want to focus on that you make sure you pick up is Scorching Ray, which is basically it's like a fire version of magic missile, except it's not a guaranteed hit, and it will deal a lot of fire damage, which is our main focus. And Fireball is a huge AoE fire spell that will destroy enemies. Just be careful not to hit your allies again, as this deals a lot of damage and you can very easily hurt your allies as well. But otherwise, really just experiment with what you want to play around with. The key focus is that you are using fire spells throughout every level and focusing on that. Otherwise, you can really supplement this with any kind of damage or manipulation spells like Hold Person or Sleep that you choose to. That's really up to you. It's time to gear up. Now, the only thing you really need to focus on here is making sure that your hands are free so that you can cast spells. You will start off with 2 daggers and a crossbow. Just make sure you remove one of those so you can cast spells from your hands. I have a crossbow in my back pocket in case I do need to deal some physical damage. I did originally play around with the crossbow, however, I found it's more consistent to stick with Firebolt because we do have such a high charisma. It's just better to stick with that as our main damage dealer until we start getting some of those better, higher level spells. As a sorcerer, you won't be wearing any armor because we are having our draconic resistances, so that doesn't matter either. It's really not a equipment dependent build. It doesn't matter what weapons or anything you're using. Really, it's just hands free, chuck on a shirt, and away you go. If you do find better equipment like necklaces and rings throughout the game, obviously chuck them on, but that's really up to you. And now let's get into some sorcerer tips. Hide behind corners as much as possible, pop out from the corner, deal some fire damage, and then jump back in the corner. So you avoid damage and just really keep away from enemies. You are really a mid-range caster. You want to keep a solid distance away from enemies, but close enough that if you do want to go into close range, do something like Burning Hands, you can. It's also worth pointing out that we do have a high armor class being around the 16-17 range, depending on your dexterity modifier. So it doesn't matter too much if you do get caught in melee range. You can take a bit of a hit, especially with the extra hit points you do get from leveling up, so it's not too much of a big deal. But basically, you want to stick in that mid-range, deal as much damage as you can, only go into the close range if you need to, and try and avoid those attacks of opportunities by avoiding that close range. And really, that is the Sorceress build for Solasta. If you enjoyed this video, do let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more build guides for Solasta. I would be interested to know if you would like to see more. I can definitely make more. Please follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and on Twitch, where I stream 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, Australian night times. Hope to see you guys there in the next stream. Thank you for watching this video. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.